The howling wind carried her tears away as Hannah Dawson stood on the edge of Winnetka, Colorado, watching the dust devils dance across the plains. The year was 1876, and at 26, she was already considered a spinster, a woman destined to live in the margins of society. But today, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows on the dirt road leading into town, Hannah had no idea that her life was about to change forever. Her husband's pocket watch weighed heavy in her hand. 2 years since Robert's death, yet Winnetka had no mercy for a widow who refused to remarry quickly. A woman alone was suspicious, dangerous, even especially one who insisted on running her own homestead. "You'll bring nothing but trouble," Edith Palmer had spat at her just this morning outside the general store. "A woman needs a husband. It ain't natural otherwise." Hannah closed her fist around the timepiece, its steady ticking a reminder that life continued, even when it seemed impossible. She squared her shoulders and turned back toward town. She needed supplies, regardless of how the townsfolk treated her. The main street of Winnetka was modest by any standard, a single dusty thoroughfare lined with wooden buildings. The general store, a saloon, the sheriff's office, and a small church at the far end. But to Hannah, it felt like running a gauntlet every time she visited. She tied her horse, a sturdy mare named Pearl, outside Mercer's general store and smoothed her worn but clean dress. Inside, the familiar smell of coffee, leather, and dried goods greeted her. Mr. Mercer stood behind the counter, his spectacles perched on his nose as he tallied numbers in his ledger. "Afternoon, Mr. Mercer," Hannah said, her voice steady despite the way his eyes narrowed. "Mrs. Dawson," he replied curtly, though the "Mrs." sounded more like an accusation than a courtesy. Hannah placed her basket on the counter. "I need flour, coffee, sugar, and some cloth if you have it. The blue cotton if it's still available." "Blue cotton's been sold," he said, not looking up from his ledger. "Got brown." "That will do," Hannah replied, refusing to show her disappointment. The blue would have made a nice curtain for her kitchen window. As Mr. Mercer gathered her items, the bell above the door jingled. Hannah didn't turn, recognizing the heavy footfalls of Sheriff Walton. "Hannah Dawson," the sheriff drawled, "just the woman I wanted to see." Hannah turned slowly. "Sheriff." Sheriff Walton was a heavyset man with a perpetual sheen of sweat on his forehead. He'd been Robert's friend once, but that friendship hadn't extended to his widow. "Got complaints about your property," he said, hooking his thumbs in his belt. "Seems that fence of yours is crossing into Pritchard land." Hannah felt her cheeks flush with anger. "That's not possible, Sheriff. I've maintained the same boundary line that Robert established." "Mr. Pritchard is trying to push me out, same as everyone else." "Now, I ain't saying who's right or wrong here," Walton said, though his tone made it clear exactly who he believed. "But a woman alone can't properly manage land boundaries. It's just a fact." Mr. Mercer snorted in agreement as he placed her items on the counter. Hannah counted out her coins carefully, aware of every eye in the store on her. "My boundary is correct," she said firmly, "and I'm capable of managing my land just fine." Sheriff Walton sighed as if dealing with a difficult child. "Hannah, be reasonable. Pritchard has offered to buy your place at a fair price. You could move into town, maybe work at the hotel. It ain't right, a woman living out there alone." "My husband left me that land, Sheriff," Hannah replied, gathering her purchases, "and I intend to keep it." "Your husband's been dead 2 years, Mercer interjected. "Time to move on, girl." Hannah felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the mixture of grief and rage that had become her constant companion. "I have moved on, Mr. Mercer. I'm supporting myself, which seems to be what bothers everyone." She turned to leave, but Sheriff Walton blocked her path. "Hannah, I'm trying to help you," he said in a low voice. People are talking. It ain't natural. A young woman refusing to remarry. Makes folks wonder what you're hiding out there. I'm hiding nothing except my desire to be left alone, Hannah replied, her voice trembling slightly. Now, if you'll excuse me. She pushed past him and stepped outside, gulping the fresh air. She secured her purchases to Pearl's saddle, her hands shaking with suppressed emotion. They giving you trouble again? Hannah turned to find Martha Cooper, the midwife, standing nearby. At 50, Martha was one of the few women in town who showed Hannah any kindness. Nothing new, Hannah replied with a tight smile. Martha glanced around before stepping closer. Listen, Hannah. The town council met yesterday. They're talking about condemning your property on some trumped-up health violation. Pritchard wants your water rights, and he's got the council in his pocket. Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. They can't do that. They'll try, Martha warned. You need protection, girl. A husband, a brother, someone with standing. I don't have anyone, Hannah whispered. Then find someone, Martha said bluntly, or you'll lose everything Robert left you. Hannah mounted Pearl, her mind racing. Thank you for the warning, Martha. The older woman nodded. Be careful riding home. Storm's coming. Hannah looked to the west, where dark clouds were gathering over the mountains. I'll hurry. She urged Pearl into a trot, eager to put distance between herself and Winnetka. The thought of losing her land, the only thing she had left of Robert, the only means of her independence, made her sick with fear. The first fat raindrops were falling as Hannah reached the halfway point to her homestead. The wind had picked up, driving the rain sideways, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Pearl snorted nervously as lightning flashed across the sky. Easy, girl, Hannah soothed. We're almost home. But the storm was moving faster than anticipated. Within minutes, the rain was coming down in sheets, turning the dirt road into a treacherous mudslide. Hannah leaned forward in the saddle, squinting against the downpour. A crack of lightning struck a nearby tree, sending Pearl into a panicked rear. Hannah clung desperately to the reins, but the sudden movement, combined with the slippery saddle, sent her tumbling to the ground. She landed hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. Pearl bolted, disappearing into the curtain of rain with Hannah's supplies. Pearl. Hannah called, struggling to her feet, but her voice was lost in the howling wind. Pain shot through her ankle as she put weight on it, and she gasped, leaning against a boulder for support. She was still a good mile from home, soaked to the skin, with night approaching and a storm raging. Hannah bit her lip, fighting back tears of frustration. She would have to walk, injured ankle or not. Each step was agony, the mud sucking at her boots, the rain plastering her dress to her skin. Hannah kept her eyes on the road, focusing on placing one foot in front of the other. She was so intent on her painful progress that she didn't notice the rider until he was almost upon her. A large black horse emerged from the gloom, its rider a dark silhouette against the storm-gray sky. Hannah froze, suddenly aware of her vulnerability, a woman alone on a deserted road. The rider pulled alongside her and leaned down. "Madam, you all right?" His voice was deep with a hint of a southern drawl. As he pushed his hat back, Hannah could make out a strong jawline and concerned eyes. "My horse bolted," Hannah explained, having to shout over the storm. "I'm trying to get home." The man dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing his considerable height. "You're hurt," he observed, noticing how she favored her right leg. "I'll manage," Hannah insisted, though another step sent pain shooting up her leg. "No need to manage alone," the stranger said. He removed his oilskin coat and draped it over her shoulders before she could protest. The warmth of it, still holding his body heat, was immediately comforting. "I'm Drake Sutton," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Just passing through these parts." "Hannah Dawson," she replied, suddenly conscious of her bedraggled appearance. My homestead is about a mile east, Drake nodded. Then that's where we're headed. Can you ride? Before Hannah could answer, he had lifted her onto his horse with surprising gentleness. He mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist as he took the reins. Hold tight, Mrs. Dawson, he said, his breath warm against her ear. I'll have you home in no time. Hannah should have been terrified alone with a stranger, dependent on his mercy. But something about Drake Sutton's quiet confidence was reassuring rather than threatening. As the horse picked its way carefully through the storm, Hannah found herself leaning back against his solid chest, grateful for the support. They rode in silence, the only sounds the drumming of rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. Hannah directed him with simple gestures when they reached the fork in the road. Soon, the outline of her small homestead appeared through the rain, a modest cabin with a barn and corral beside it. That's it, Hannah said, pointing. As they approached, Hannah was relieved to see Pearl huddled under the overhang of the barn, still saddled with her purchases. Looks like your horse had the sense to come home, at least, Drake observed as he guided his mount toward the cabin. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Hannah down. When her feet touched the ground, her ankle buckled beneath her. Drake caught her before she could fall, sweeping her into his arms. I can walk, Hannah protested weakly. No need, Drake replied, carrying her to the porch as if she weighed nothing. On the covered porch, Hannah fumbled in her pocket for the key and directed him to the hidden lock. Drake managed to open the door while still holding her, then carried her inside. The cabin was simple but clean and welcoming. A stone fireplace dominated one wall and handmade curtains framed the windows. Drake set Hannah gently in a chair near the cold hearth. I'll get a fire going, he said, already moving to the wood box. Hannah watched as he efficiently arranged kindling and logs, striking a match to start the fire. In the growing light, she could see him clearly for the first time. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with dark hair and tanned skin that spoke of a life lived outdoors. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and the gun at his hip looked well-maintained. I should see to the horses, he said once the fire was crackling. There's a stall open in the barn, Hannah told him, and grain in the bin by the door. Drake nodded and stepped back out into the storm. While he was gone, Hannah removed his coat and hobbled to the kitchen area to put on water for coffee. She should be terrified, she knew. A strange man at her isolated cabin, no one knowing he was here. Yet she felt oddly at ease, as if Drake Sutton's arrival was somehow meant to be. When he returned, he was carrying her purchases from Pearl's saddle, water dripping from his hat and clothes. Your mare's settled, he reported. Seems no worse for the adventure. Thank you, Hannah said, taking the bundle from him. I've put coffee on. You should warm yourself by the fire. Drake removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. Much obliged, Mrs. Dawson. Please call me Hannah, she said, surprising herself with the invitation to familiarity. Hannah, he repeated, and something in the way he said her name sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. As the coffee boiled, Hannah retrieved a blanket and handed it to Drake. You should get out of that wet coat. I'm afraid I don't have any men's clothes to offer you. Drake accepted the blanket with a smile. This will do fine, but you should change too. That ankle needs attention and you'll catch your death in those wet things. Hannah knew he was right. I'll just be a moment, she said, disappearing behind the curtain that separated her sleeping area from the main room. Changing proved difficult with her injured ankle. But Hannah managed to remove her sodden dress and don a clean nightgown and robe. When she emerged, Drake had removed his wet outer layers and draped them near the fire. The blanket was wrapped around his shoulders over his damp shirt. He looked up as she approached, his eyes taking in her changed appearance before quickly returning to her face. "Let me help you with that ankle," he said, pulling a chair close to his. Before Hannah could protest, he was gently lifting her injured foot onto his knee. His hands were calloused but surprisingly gentle as he examined the swelling. "Not broken," he pronounced after careful prodding that made Hannah wince. "Bad sprain, though. You'll need to stay off it for a few days." Hannah shook her head. "I can't. There's too much to do around here." Drake looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "You got any neighbors who could help out?" The question brought all of Hannah's troubles rushing back. "No," she said quietly. "I'm not exactly welcome in these parts." Something flickered in Drake's eyes, understanding, perhaps. "Because you're a woman alone," Hannah nodded. "My husband died 2 years ago. The town thinks it's unnatural for me to stay here by myself, to run this place on my own." Drake's jaw tightened. "Some folks can't abide a woman with a mind of her own." "It's more than that now," Hannah said, pouring them both coffee. "They're trying to take my land." As the storm raged outside, Hannah found herself telling this stranger everything about Robert's death from pneumonia, about her struggle to maintain the homestead, about Pritchard's designs on her water rights, and the town's increasing hostility. Drake listened without interrupting, his eyes thoughtful. When she finished, he sipped his coffee in silence for a moment. "Seems to me," he finally said, "that what you need is a husband." Hannah stiffened. "I don't need a man to validate my existence." Drake's lips curved in a smile that transformed his serious face. "No, madam, you surely don't, but this ain't about what you need. It's about what they think you need." "What difference does it make?" Hannah asked bitterly. "I'm not going to marry some local farmer just to appease the town council." "What if you didn't have to?" Drake asked, his eyes steady on hers. Hannah frowned. "I don't understand." Drake set his coffee cup down. "I'm headed to California, planning to start fresh there, but I've got no particular timeline." He paused. "What if, as far as Winnetka knows, you've got yourself a husband now?" Hannah stared at him, understanding slowly dawning. "You're suggesting, pretending to be my husband," Drake nodded. "Just long enough to get them off your back, to secure your claim to this land." "Why would you do that?" Hannah asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. "What would you get out of it?" "A place to rest for a spell," Drake replied simply. "I've been riding hard for weeks." And he added, his eyes crinkling at the corners, "I've never much cared for bullies, whether they wear badges or sit on town councils." Hannah studied him, looking for signs of deception. "You're a stranger. I know nothing about you." "True enough," Drake acknowledged. "But sometimes a stranger's the only ally you've got." The fire popped and hissed, sending shadows dancing across the walls as Hannah considered his offer. It was madness to trust this man, to invite him into her life, even temporarily. Yet what choice did she have? She was about to lose everything. "If we did this," she said slowly, "there would have to be rules." Drake nodded. "Name them." "This would be for appearance only," Hannah said firmly. "You would sleep in the barn, fair enough. And we'd need a story how we met when we married, something believable." Drake leaned back in his chair. "Simple is best. I was passing through, we met, there was a connection, a whirlwind romance. People love that kind of tale." Despite herself, Hannah felt a smile tugging at her lips. "You seem to have given this some thought." "Just practical thinking," Drake replied with a shrug. "So do we have an agreement, Mrs. Sutton?" The sound of what would be her new name sent a strange flutter through Hannah's chest. "This is temporary," she reminded him, "until the threat to my land is resolved." Drake extended his hand. "Temporary," he agreed. Hannah hesitated only a moment before taking his hand. His palm was warm against hers, the grip firm but gentle. In that touch was a promise, but of what exactly, Hannah wasn't sure. As the storm continued to rage outside, Hannah Dawson and Drake Sutton began to craft their fiction a love story for the benefit of Winnetka, Colorado. Neither could have guessed how that fiction might blur with reality in the days to come. The morning after the storm dawned clear and bright, with puddles of rainwater the only evidence of the previous night's downpour. Hannah woke to the unfamiliar sound of movement in her kitchen. For a moment, she lay still, confused, until the events of yesterday came rushing back. Drake Sutton. Their bargain. She rose quickly, tying her robe around her waist before pulling the curtain aside. Drake stood at her stove, his back to her as he tended to something in a pan. He'd already built up the fire and coffee was brewing on the back burner. "Good morning," Hannah said, somewhat stiffly. Drake turned, spatula in hand. "Morning. Hope you don't mind me taking liberties with your kitchen. Figured you could use a proper breakfast, what with that ankle." Hannah moved carefully to the table, testing her ankle. It was still painful and swollen, but bearable if she didn't put her full weight on it. "You slept in the barn?" she asked, noticing his freshly shaven face and damp hair. Drake nodded. "As agreed. Found an old razor in the wash house and helped myself. Hope that's all right." "It's fine," Hannah replied, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. She smoothed her hair self-consciously. Drake turned back to the stove, sliding what appeared to be cornmeal pancakes onto a plate. "Coffee's hot," he said, nodding toward the pot. As Hannah poured herself a cup, she observed him surreptitiously. In the clear light of day, her decision to trust this stranger seemed even more reckless. Yet there was something reassuring about the efficient way he moved around her kitchen, as if he belonged there. "I checked your stores while getting breakfast together," Drake said, setting a plate before her. "You're running low on just about everything. Thought I might ride into town today, get supplies." Hannah nearly choked on her coffee. "Into Winnetka? As my husband?" Drake raised an eyebrow. "That was the plan, wasn't it? No time like the present to make our announcement." Hannah set her cup down carefully. "I suppose you're right, it's just... It suddenly seems very real." "Having second thoughts?" Drake asked, his expression unreadable. Hannah considered the question. Was she? The thought of deceiving the town made her uncomfortable, yet the alternative, losing her land, was unthinkable. "No," she said firmly, "but we should go over our story again. Make sure we have the details straight." Over breakfast, they refined their tale. They had met when Drake passed through the area 6 weeks ago. He had stopped to help when her wagon wheel broke on the road to town. There had been an immediate connection, and when he returned 2 weeks later, he'd proposed. They'd been married by a traveling preacher just 3 days ago. Simple, easy to remember, and romantic enough to be believable, Drake concluded, finishing his coffee. "Speaking of believable, we'll need rings." Hannah twisted her hands in her lap. "I still have my wedding band from Robert." Drake nodded thoughtfully. "I understand if you'd rather not use it. We could find something else." "No," Hannah said after a moment. "It makes sense to use it. Robert would understand." She rose and went to a small wooden box on the mantel, retrieving the simple gold band she'd removed after Robert's funeral. She held it out to Drake. "For appearances," she said softly. Drake took it carefully. "For appearances," he agreed. "I'll need to get one for myself in town." As he prepared to leave, Hannah gave him a list of supplies and directions to Mercer's store. She also provided him with what money she could spare. "This should cover everything," she said. "And Drake, be careful. Sheriff Walton is particularly suspicious." Drake checked his gun and tucked it into his holster. "Don't worry about me. I've handled tougher customers than a small-town sheriff." He paused at the door. "Any message you want me to deliver to the good people of Winnetka?" Hannah smiled despite her nervousness. "Just that I'm happy." With a tip of his hat, Drake was gone. Hannah watched from the window as he mounted his horse and rode toward town, his straight back and confident posture a stark contrast to her own anxiety. She spent the morning cleaning the cabin and tending to her ankle, all the while imagining what might be happening in Winnetka. Would anyone believe their story? What if they asked questions Drake couldn't answer? What if? Hannah forced herself to stop catastrophizing. Drake struck her as a man who could handle himself. And truthfully, what did she have to lose? Her reputation in town was already in tatters. It was early afternoon when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Hannah limped to the door, surprised to see not only Drake returning but Sheriff Walton and another rider following behind. Drake dismounted first, carrying several packages. His expression was calm as he approached the porch. "Afternoon, wife," he called, loud enough for the others to hear. "Brought company home with me." Hannah steeled herself, stepping onto the porch. "I see that." Sheriff Walton and the other man Hannah recognized him as Thomas Pritchard reined in their horses. The sheriff's face was a mask of suspicion. "Mrs. Dawson," he began. "Mrs. Sutton now, Sheriff," Drake corrected smoothly, setting his packages down to stand beside Hannah. His arm slipped naturally around her waist, and it took all her willpower not to stiffen at the unexpected contact. "So I've been told," Walton replied dryly. "Quite a surprise to the town, your sudden marriage." "Love doesn't always keep to a convenient schedule, Sheriff," Hannah replied, finding her voice. Pritchard, a barrel-chested man with a perpetually florid face, snorted. "Mighty convenient timing, though, wouldn't you say? Just when the town council was discussing your property." Drake's arm tightened slightly around Hannah's waist. "My wife mentioned there was some confusion about her property lines. I'll be happy to walk them with you anytime, Mr. Pritchard." "Your wife's property lines have been in dispute for months," Pritchard replied. "Seems odd you haven't addressed it before now." "I've been establishing my business in Denver," Drake said smoothly. "Hannah and I corresponded regularly, but I couldn't get away until recently. When she wrote about the trouble, I decided it was time to make our arrangement permanent." "Arrangement?" Walton questioned. Hannah felt her cheeks grow warm. "What my husband means is that we'd been courting through letters." Drake smiled down at her with convincing affection. "Couldn't stand the thought of my girl facing troubles alone." He turned back to the men. "Now, gentlemen, if there's nothing else, my wife should be resting that ankle, and I've got supplies to unload." Walton and Pritchard exchanged glances. "Actually," the sheriff said, "I'd like to see your marriage certificate." Hannah felt her heart sink. They hadn't anticipated this, but Drake merely nodded. "Of course. Come inside, I'll get it for you." Hannah followed Drake into the cabin, her mind racing. They had no certificate, no proof of their supposed marriage. Once inside, Drake set the packages on the table and moved to his saddlebag, which he'd left by the door that morning. From it, he withdrew a folded document. "Here we are," he said, handing it to Walton, who had followed them inside. The sheriff unfolded the paper, his eyes narrowing as he read. "Reverend James Hollister, traveling preacher," Drake explained, "passing through on his way to Utah Territory." Walton scrutinized the document, which appeared to Hannah to be a legitimate marriage certificate, complete with signatures. Where had Drake gotten it? Had he forged it today in town? "Well," Walton finally said, "seems to be in order." He handed the paper back to Drake. "Still, it's mighty convenient, Sutton, you showing up just when Mrs. Sutton was facing difficulties." Drake's expression hardened slightly. "Are you implying something, Sheriff?" "Just making an observation," Walton replied. "Town's got an interest in all its citizens, especially when there's disputes over valuable land." "The dispute is manufactured," Hannah said firmly. "My boundary lines haven't changed since Robert established them." "Your first husband," Pritchard clarified with a sneer. Yes, Hannah replied, lifting her chin. My first husband, who was respected in this town until his death, when suddenly his widow became an object of suspicion. Walton had the decency to look somewhat abashed. No one saying they don't need to say it, Drake interrupted. Actions speak clearly enough. Now, if you'll excuse us, my wife needs to rest her ankle and I have chores to attend to. The dismissal was polite but firm. Walton hesitated, then nodded. We'll be on our way. But this matter with the property line isn't settled, Sutton. The town council will want to review all claims. I look forward to it, Drake replied, his hand resting possessively on Hannah's shoulder. When the men had finally departed, Hannah sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. Where did you get that certificate? She asked, gesturing to the document Drake was carefully refolding. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. Let's just say I have many skills. You forged it, Hannah realized. That could be serious trouble, Drake shrugged. Only if they can prove it's forged. And they won't be able to. Reverend James Hollister does exist and does travel these parts. I just borrowed his name for our purposes. Hannah didn't know whether to be impressed or alarmed by Drake's facility with deception. What happened in town? She asked instead. Drake began unpacking the supplies. About what you'd expect. Surprise, suspicion, and no small amount of gossip. Martha Cooper seemed pleased, though, said it was about time you had someone looking out for you. Martha's the only one in town who's ever been kind to me, Hannah admitted. Well, now they'll all have to be civil at least, Drake said, placing a small package before her. Got you something. Hannah opened it carefully to find a length of blue cotton fabric, the same she'd wanted for curtains. Mercer claimed he was out, she said, touching the soft material. He was holding it for Mrs. Palmer, Drake explained. But I convinced him that a new bride deserved a wedding gift. Hannah looked up at him, oddly touched by the gesture. Thank you, Drake nodded, suddenly looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. It's nothing. Just trying to make our story believable. As he turned away to continue unpacking, Hannah found herself studying him with new eyes. Who was this man who had ridden into her life during a storm, who created forged documents and charmed fabric from reluctant shopkeepers? And why was he really helping her? That night, after Drake had gone to sleep in the barn, Hannah lay awake in her bed, turning these questions over in her mind. The gold band was back on her finger, a strange weight that felt both familiar and foreign. She was playing a dangerous game, she knew. But as she drifted off to sleep, Hannah couldn't help but feel that for the first time in 2 years, she wasn't facing her battles alone. The next morning, Drake was again in the kitchen when Hannah awoke. This time, he was cooking eggs and bacon, the rich aroma filling the small cabin. Your pantry's better stocked now, he said by way of greeting, and there's fresh coffee. You don't need to cook for me, Hannah said, though she was secretly pleased not to have to manage breakfast with her injured ankle. Seems only fair, Drake replied. You're providing the roof over my head. As they ate, Drake outlined his plans for the day. I'm going to ride your property line, get familiar with the boundaries. Then I thought I'd check that fence Pritchard claims is on his land. Hannah nodded. The maps are in the drawer by the fireplace. Robert was very precise about the boundaries. Good man, Drake commented. I'll also take a look at your barn roof. Noticed some shingles missing yesterday. You don't have to do repairs, Hannah protested. Our arrangement doesn't require that. Drake looked up from his plate. What kind of husband would I be if I let my wife's roof leak? His eyes crinkled with amusement. Besides, I'm not one for sitting idle. After breakfast, Drake consulted the maps and rode out to survey the property. Hannah, left alone, found herself thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. Just days ago, she had been facing the loss of her home, isolated and vulnerable. Now she had an ally, albeit a temporary one. She was washing the breakfast dishes when a knock came at the door. Hannah froze, water dripping from her hands. Who could it be? Had Walton or Pritchard returned? Drying her hands quickly, she limped to the door and opened it to find Martha Cooper standing on the porch, a basket in her hands. "Martha," Hannah said, genuinely pleased to see the midwife. "Come in." Martha stepped inside, her sharp eyes taking in the cabin. "So it's true," she said without preamble. "You've gone and married again." Hannah gestured for Martha to sit at the table. "News travels fast." "It's Winnetka," Martha replied dryly. "A leaf can't fall without the whole town discussing what kind of tree it came from." She set her basket on the table. "Brought you some of my blackberry preserves. Consider it a wedding gift." "That's very kind," Hannah said, touched by the gesture. Martha waved away the thanks. "Now tell me about this husband of yours. Drake Sutton, is it? Whole town's talking about the mysterious stranger who swept you off your feet." Hannah smiled, reciting the story they had crafted. "We met when he helped me with a broken wagon wheel. There was a connection between us. He had business in Denver but wrote to me. When he returned, we decided not to wait." Martha's eyes were shrewd. "Romantic and timely, what with Pritchard making moves on your land." Hannah looked down at her hands. "Drake's protective. He doesn't like the idea of anyone trying to bully me." Martha said noncommittally. "And where is this protective husband now, riding the property lines?" Hannah replied. "He wants to get familiar with the boundaries, especially with this dispute." Martha nodded slowly. "Smart man, and handsome too, from what I hear." Hannah felt her cheeks warm. "I suppose he is." "You suppose?" Martha raised an eyebrow. "Girl, if you can look at that man and only suppose he's handsome, then you're either blind or lying." Hannah laughed despite herself. "All right, yes, he's handsome." Martha leaned forward. "And how are things, otherwise?" Her meaningful tone made the question's intent clear. "Martha," Hannah exclaimed, her blush deepening, "that's private." The older woman chuckled. "Just checking. A hasty marriage often means a baby's on the way. Thought perhaps that might be why you suddenly found yourself a husband." "No," Hannah said firmly. "There's no baby, just love." The word felt strange on her tongue, a deception that somehow seemed worse than all the others. Martha patted her hand. "Well, I'm glad for you, whatever the reason. You deserve happiness, Hannah. And having a man around will certainly quiet some of the talk." They chatted a while longer, Martha filling Hannah in on the town's reaction to her sudden marriage. Most were suspicious, as expected, but a few were genuinely pleased for her. "Edith Palmer's nose is out of joint, though," Martha said gleefully. "She had her eye on your land for her son. Now she's spreading rumors that your Drake is some kind of outlaw." Hannah's heart skipped. "What makes her say that?" Martha shrugged. "Just spite, I expect. Though he does have that dangerous look about him. Those eyes see more than they let on." After Martha left, Hannah sat at the table troubled. She knew nothing about Drake's past. What if there was truth to Edith's suspicions? What if Drake Sutton was running from something or someone? She was still pondering these questions when Drake returned in the late afternoon. He dismounted wearily, his clothes dusty from the day's ride. "Your first husband knew what he was doing," he reported as he entered the cabin. "Those boundary lines are exactly where the maps show them. Pritchard's the one who's moved his fence, trying to encroach on your water access." "That doesn't surprise me," Hannah replied. "Thomas Pritchard has been trying to expand his holdings for years." Drake removed his hat, running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "Well, he picked the wrong woman's land to covet." Hannah poured him a cup of water from the pitcher. "Martha Cooper came by today." Drake accepted the water gratefully. "The midwife. She seemed decent enough in town." She is, Hannah confirmed, but she mentioned something. Some people in town are saying you might be an outlaw. Drake's expression didn't change as he drank deeply. People talk, he said finally, especially when a stranger rides into town. Are they right? Hannah asked directly. Drake met her gaze. Depends on what you mean by outlaw. I've never robbed a bank or held up a stagecoach if that's what you're asking. But, Hannah pressed, sensing there was more. Drake sighed, setting his cup down. But I've had my share of trouble with the law. Nothing that should follow me here, though. I should know what I'm dealing with, Hannah said. If there's a chance your past could complicate our arrangement. Drake considered this for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. I was a scout for the Union Army during the war. Afterward, I drifted, taking work where I could find it. Did some bounty hunting for a while. Is that all? Hannah asked, sensing his hesitation. Drake's jaw tightened. No. 2 years ago, I killed a man in self-defense in Missouri. He was the brother of the county judge. They called it murder, put a price on my head. I've been moving ever since, staying ahead of bounty hunters. Hannah felt a chill run through her. You're wanted for murder in Missouri, Drake clarified. And it wasn't murder. The man drew on me first in front of a dozen witnesses. But none of them were willing to testify against the judge's family. Hannah stood, moving away from the table. You should have told me this before. Would you have accepted my help if I had? Drake challenged. Hannah didn't answer immediately. Would she have? The thought of harboring a wanted man, even one who claimed innocence, was terrifying. Yet Drake had been nothing but helpful and respectful since his arrival. I don't know, she finally admitted. Drake nodded as if her uncertainty was the answer he expected. For what it's worth, I don't think anyone in Winnetka knows about the Missouri warrant, and I've been careful to stay out of that state. But if they find out, they won't, Drake said firmly. Not unless someone from there recognizes me, which is unlikely in this small Colorado town. Hannah wrapped her arms around herself. This changes things. Does it? Drake asked quietly. I'm still the same man who rode in during the storm, still the same man who offered to help you keep your land. Why? Hannah finally asked the question that had been nagging at her. Why help me at all? What do you really get out of this arrangement? Drake was silent for a long moment. Maybe I'm tired of running, he finally said. Maybe I wanted to remember, just for a while, what it's like to have a purpose beyond surviving another day. The raw honesty in his voice caught Hannah off guard. She had expected evasion, perhaps even lies. Instead, she got a glimpse of the man beneath the careful exterior. I understand wanting a purpose, she said softly. After Robert died, everyone expected me to sell the homestead, to move into town and become someone's housekeeper or seamstress. But this land was our dream. Working it every day gave me a reason to keep going. Drake nodded. Then we understand each other. I help you keep your purpose, and for a little while you give me one. It wasn't a complete answer, Hannah knew. There were still secrets Drake Sutton was keeping, but for now it was enough. I'll start supper, she said, moving toward the kitchen area. You should wash up. There's fresh water in the wash house. As Drake headed outside, Hannah tried to sort through her conflicted feelings. She was harboring a wanted man, a man who might bring danger to her doorstep. Yet something in her trusted him, believed his story about self-defense and a corrupt judge. What did that say about her judgment? After all, she barely knew Drake Sutton. But as she prepared their meal, Hannah remembered how he had carried her through the storm, how he had faced down Sheriff Walton, how he had somehow procured the blue cotton she'd wanted. Small kindnesses that suggested a decent man beneath the mysterious exterior. For now, she would trust that man and hope she wasn't making the biggest mistake of her life. Over the next week, Hannah and Drake fell into a routine that might almost be called domestic. He slept in the barn as a grade, but spent his days working around the homestead repairing the roof, mending fences, and helping with chores that Hannah's injured ankle made difficult. In the evenings, they shared meals and conversation. Hannah learned that Drake had grown up in Virginia, the son of a horse breeder. He had a younger sister somewhere in Pennsylvania, though they hadn't spoken in years. He enjoyed reading when he could get his hands on books, especially histories and adventure tales. He never spoke of the incident in Missouri again, and Hannah didn't ask, though the knowledge of it lingered between them like a shadow. For her part, Hannah shared stories of her life with Robert, their journey west from Ohio, their dreams for the homestead, the hard work of those early years. She spoke of the pneumonia that had taken him so quickly, leaving her alone to face the town's growing hostility. Robert would have fought them, she said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. He never backed down when he believed he was right. "Sounds like you're well matched in that regard," Drake observed with a small smile. Hannah returned the smile, surprised by how comfortable she had become in Drake's presence. "I suppose I am stubborn, determined," Drake corrected. "There's a difference." On the 8th day of their arrangement, Hannah's ankle had improved enough that she decided to accompany Drake into town for supplies. They rode side by side, Hannah on Pearl and Drake on his black gelding, which she had learned was named Midnight. "Remember," Drake said as the buildings of Winnetka came into view, "you're a happily married woman now. We need to act the part." Hannah nodded, nervousness fluttering in her stomach. It was one thing to play the role of wife in the privacy of her homestead. It was quite another to do so under the scrutinizing eyes of the town. As they rode down the main street, Hannah was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. She held her head high, determined not to show any sign of discomfort. They stopped first at the general store. Drake dismounted and came around to help Hannah down from Pearl, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary, all part of the performance. She reminded herself, ignoring the warmth that spread through her at his touch. Inside Mercer's store, the usual chatter died down as they entered. Mr. Mercer himself looked up from his ledger, his expression guarded. "Mrs. Sutton," he said, the name still awkward on his tongue. "Mr. Sutton, what can I help you with today?" Drake's hand rested possessively at the small of Hannah's back as she presented her list. "Just the usual supplies, Mr. Mercer. And perhaps some of that candy stick I saw in the jar there. My wife has a sweet tooth she won't admit to." Hannah shot him a surprised look, which he answered with a wink. She hadn't told him about her fondness for peppermint. As Mercer gathered their items, Edith Palmer and her daughter-in-law entered the store. Edith's eyes narrowed at the sight of Hannah and Drake. "Well," she said loudly, "if it isn't the newlyweds. How convenient that you found a husband just when the town was questioning your ability to manage that homestead." Drake turned, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Mrs. Palmer, I presume? Hannah's told me all about you." Edith stiffened. "Has she indeed? And what exactly has she told you?" "Only that you've been very concerned about her welfare," Drake replied smoothly. "Rest assured, my wife is well taken care of now." The emphasis he placed on "my wife" was subtle but unmistakable, a claiming, a warning. Edith's lips pinched together. "Yes, well, it's all very sudden. Makes a person wonder what the rush might be." "The rush, Mrs. Palmer," Drake said, his voice dropping to a dangerous softness, "was that I couldn't bear to be apart from Hannah any longer. When you find something as precious as the love of a good woman, you don't delay in claiming it." His arm slid around Hannah's waist, pulling her against his side. She forced herself to relax into the embrace, to look up at him with what she hoped appeared to be adoration rather than surprise. "Isn't that right, darling?" Drake prompted. "Yes," Hannah managed, her voice steadier than she expected. "Drake swept me off my feet." Edith sniffed disbelievingly but seemed unwilling to challenge them further. She moved to the far side of the store, though Hannah could feel her watchful gaze. When their supplies were gathered and paid for, Drake loaded them onto their horses while Hannah waited outside the store. She was about to mount Pearl when Sheriff Walton approached. "Mrs. Sutton," he greeted her, tipping his hat. "Feeling better, I see." "Much better, thank you, Sheriff," Hannah replied politely. Walton's eyes drifted to Drake, who was securing the last of their packages. "Your husband's made himself quite at home in Winnetka." "It's a fine town," Hannah said, though the words nearly stuck in her throat. "Drake thinks we might do well here." "Does he now?" Walton mused. "Interesting, since word is he was just passing through when you two met. Headed for California, I heard." Hannah's heart quickened. "Plans change, Sheriff, especially when you fall in love." Walton studied her face. "Indeed they do. Still makes a man curious. What brings a drifter like Sutton to a small town like ours? What's he running from?" Before Hannah could respond, Drake appeared at her side. "Not running from, Sheriff. Running to." He smiled down at Hannah. "Sometimes a man finds something worth stopping for." Walton's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Sutton, I've been making some inquiries about you." Drake's expression remained pleasant, though Hannah felt him tense beside her. "Have you now? Find anything interesting?" "Not yet," Walton admitted. "But telegraphs take time." "Well, I wish you luck with your inquiries," Drake said easily. "Now, if you'll excuse us, my wife and I have a long ride home." He helped Hannah mount Pearl, then swung on to Midnight. With a tip of his hat to Walton, Drake led them away from the store. They rode in silence until they were well clear of town. Then Hannah pulled alongside Drake. "He's asking about you," she said, anxiety evident in her voice. "What if he discovers the Missouri warrant?" Drake's jaw was set in a hard line. "Then we'll deal with it." "How?" Hannah pressed. "If they find out you're wanted, they'll arrest you. And once they discover our marriage is a sham, we'll figure it out," Drake interrupted. "One problem at a time, Hannah." But Hannah couldn't shake her unease. Walton was suspicious, and from the sound of it, he had already sent telegrams seeking information about Drake. It was only a matter of time before he learned the truth. That night, as Hannah prepared for bed, she found herself unable to stop thinking about the day's events. Drake's protective stance against Edith Palmer. The way his arm had felt around her waist. The conviction in his voice when he'd told Walton he'd found something worth stopping for. It was all for show, she reminded herself sternly. A performance for the benefit of Winnetka. Yet something had shifted between them. Something Hannah couldn't quite name but could feel in the air, like the charged stillness before a storm. The next morning, Hannah awoke to voices outside. Male voices, angry and threatening. She threw on her robe and hurried to the door. Drake stood in the yard, facing Thomas Pritchard and two of his ranch hands. All three men were on horseback, looking down at Drake, who appeared unmoved by their presence. "Trespassing on my property yesterday," Pritchard was saying as Hannah opened the door. "Checking my own fences isn't trespassing," Drake replied calmly. "And we both know that water access is on Dawson land. Always has been." "Sutton land now, isn't it?" Pritchard sneered. "Convenient how quickly you laid claim to both the widow and her property." Drake's hand rested casually near his holster. "I suggest you choose your next words carefully, Pritchard." Hannah hurried down the porch steps, ignoring the twinge in her ankle. "What's going on here?" Pritchard's gaze flicked to her, his expression contemptuous. "Just having a chat with your husband about boundaries, Mrs. Sutton. Seems he doesn't understand them." "I understand them perfectly," Drake said. "Just as I understand that you've been moving your fence line for months, trying to claim water rights that don't belong to you." One of Pritchard's men, a burly fellow with a week's growth of beard, spat on the ground. "Boss says that creek's his. Good enough for me." "The maps say otherwise," Drake countered. "And so does the county record office, which I visited yesterday after leaving town." Hannah looked at him in surprise. Drake hadn't mentioned going to the county office. Pritchard's face flushed with anger. "You had no right." "I had every right," Drake interrupted. "As Hannah's husband, I have a vested interest in protecting what's ours." The claim sent an unexpected thrill through Hannah, despite the tension of the moment. "This isn't over, Sutton," Pritchard warned, gathering his reins. "No," Drake agreed. "It isn't. But when it is, that fence will be back where it belongs." Pritchard and his men rode off, dust rising behind them as they galloped away from the homestead. Hannah turned to Drake. "You went to the county office?" Drake nodded. "Needed to see the official records for myself. Pritchard's been systematically encroaching on your land a few feet at a time. But the original survey is clear the creek and 50 yards on either side belong to this homestead." "Why didn't you tell me?" Hannah asked. Drake shrugged. "Didn't want to worry you until I had all the facts." Hannah shook her head, both exasperated and touched by his concern. "This is my land, Drake. My fight. You should have told me." "Our land," Drake corrected. "Our fight, at least as far as Winnetka is concerned." Hannah wanted to argue further but was distracted by the approach of a rider from the direction of town. As the figure drew closer, she recognized Sheriff Walton. "Looks like we're popular this morning," Drake observed dryly. Walton rode into the yard and dismounted with a grunt. "Pritchard and his boys just passed me on the road," he said without preamble, looking none too pleased. "We had a difference of opinion regarding property lines," Drake explained. Walton nodded slowly. "That's so. Well, property disputes aren't why I'm here." His hand moved to his coat pocket, withdrawing a folded paper. "Got a response to one of my telegrams this morning." Hannah felt her blood turn cold. This was at the discovery of Drake's past. "Interesting reading," Walton continued, unfolding the paper. "Seems there's a Drake Sutton wanted in Missouri for murder." Drake's expression didn't change. "Is that so?" "Man matching your description killed a fellow named Edward Tanner 2 years back. Judge's brother." Walton's eyes were hard. "Bounty of $500 on his head." Hannah moved closer to Drake, fear and protective instinct overriding caution. "Sheriff, there must be some mistake." Drake's hand gently touched her arm, silencing her. "No mistake," he said to Walton. "But it wasn't murder. It was self-defense with a dozen witnesses." "That's not what the telegram says," Walton replied. "No, I expect it doesn't," Drake agreed. "Judge Tanner made sure of that." Walton's hand moved to rest on his holstered gun. "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me, Sutton, sort this out proper." "And if I decline?" Drake asked quietly. "Don't make this difficult," Walton warned. "I've got no personal quarrel with you, but the law's the law." Hannah stepped forward. "Sheriff Walton, please. Drake is innocent. He's been nothing but helpful since arriving in Winnetka. Surely that counts for something." Walton's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry, Hannah. I truly am." "But a warrant is a warrant. I have to bring him in." Drake nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. "Let me get my coat." "Drake, no," Hannah protested, grabbing his arm. "It's all right," Drake assured her, his eyes conveying a message she couldn't quite decipher. "I'll go with the sheriff, answer his questions. It'll be fine." Hannah watched helplessly as Drake retrieved his coat from the cabin. When he emerged, Walton bound his wrists in front of him. "I'll send word once we've sorted this out," Drake told Hannah as Walton led him to his horse. "Don't worry." But as she watched them ride away, Hannah was filled with dread. Drake was wanted for murder. Walton would hold him, maybe even arrange his transfer to Missouri. And once Drake was gone, Pritchard and the town council would renew their efforts to take her land. She had to do something. But what Martha? Martha Cooper would know what to do. Hannah quickly dressed and saddled Pearl. Her ankle protested the exertion, but she ignored the pain. Time was of the essence. The ride to town seemed interminable. By the time Hannah reached Martha's small house at the edge of Winnetka, she was dusty and disheveled. Martha opened the door at her knock, eyes widening at Hannah's appearance. "Good heavens, girl, what's happened?" Hannah brushed past her into the house. "Sheriff Walton arrested Drake. There's a warrant for him in Missouri." Martha closed the door, her expression grave. "I heard. News travels fast." "I need to help him," Hannah said desperately. "He's innocent, Martha. The warrant is false." Martha gestured for Hannah to sit. "Calm yourself. Tell me everything." Hannah explained as much as she knew about Drake's situation, the self-defense killing, the corrupt judge, the bounty. As she spoke, she realized how little she actually knew about the man who had become her husband. "And you believe him?" Martha asked when she'd finished. "A man you've known barely 2 weeks." "Yes," Hannah said without hesitation. "I do." Martha studied her face. "You're in love with him." "What? No, Hannah began, then stopped. Was she? The thought had never consciously formed, yet now that Martha had voiced it, Hannah couldn't dismiss it outright. "It doesn't matter," she said instead. "Drake helped me when no one else would. I can't abandon him now." Martha sighed. "Walton's holding him at the jail. He's already sent another telegram, probably to confirm the warrant and arrange transfer." "Then we need to act quickly," Hannah said, rising. "I need to speak with him." Martha caught her arm. "Not so fast. Walton won't just let you waltz into the jail. And even if you could talk to Drake, what then? You can't break him out." Hannah hadn't thought that far ahead. "I don't know, but I have to try something." Martha considered this. "Walton's sweet on my niece at the hotel, always has been. She might be able to distract him long enough for you to get a few minutes with Drake." Hope flared in Hannah's chest. "Would she help us? For me?" "Yes," Martha said decisively. "But Hannah, be careful. If Walton suspects you're plotting something, he'll make sure you don't get near Drake again." Within the hour, a plan was in motion. Martha's niece, Sarah, sent word to Walton that she needed his help at the hotel with a rowdy customer. Once he left, Hannah would have a brief window to speak with Drake. Hannah waited nervously in the alley beside the sheriff's office, watching as Walton emerged and headed toward the hotel. When he disappeared inside, she hurried to the back door of the jail. The deputy on duty was young Billy Porter, barely 18 and new to the job. He looked up in surprise as Hannah entered. "Mrs. Sutton, you can't be in here." "Please, Billy," Hannah said, injecting desperation into her voice. "I need to see my husband, just for a moment." Billy shifted uncomfortably. "Sheriff said no visitors." "The sheriff doesn't need to know," Hannah pleaded. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. Please, Billy. Would you want your mother denied the chance to see your father if he was in trouble?" The appeal to family worked. Billy hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. "But if the sheriff comes back early?" "I'll say I forced my way in," Hannah promised. "Thank you, Billy." The deputy led her to the single cell at the back of the office. Drake was sitting on the cot, his hat beside him. He looked up as they approached, surprise and then concern flashing across his face. "Hannah, what are you doing here?" Billy unlocked the cell door. 5 minutes, he reminded Hannah, then retreated to the front office. Hannah rushed inside, the cell door closing behind her. "Are you all right? Have they hurt you?" Drake stood, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. "I'm fine, but you shouldn't be here. If Walton finds you, Martha's niece is keeping him occupied," Hannah explained quickly. "Drake, I need to know the truth, all of it." Drake's eyes searched hers. "I told you the truth. I killed Edward Tanner in self-defense. His brother, the judge, made sure it was called murder. But why? Hannah pressed. Why would Tanner draw on you in the first place? Drake's hands fell away from her shoulders. Because I was escorting his wife and child to her parents' home in Kansas, away from him. Hannah hadn't expected this. His wife, Elizabeth Tanner, Drake confirmed. She was a client. I was working as a guide and escort by then. She hired me to help her escape Edward, who beat her regularly. Had the bruises to prove it. And Edward confronted you, Drake nodded, in a saloon in Jefferson City. Called me a wife-stealing bastard, drew his gun, I was faster. His expression darkened. After I killed him, his brother the judge made sure Elizabeth's testimony about the abuse was suppressed, called her hysterical, unreliable. The other witnesses were either bribed or threatened into changing their stories. What happened to Elizabeth? Hannah asked. Last I heard, she made it to her parents. Judge Tanner couldn't touch her there. Her father was a former state senator with his own connections. Drake sighed. But I had to run. Bounty hunters started showing up within days. The story rang true, fitting with the man Hannah had come to know, a man who would help a woman in trouble, regardless of the risk to himself, just as he had helped her. I believe you, she said softly, and I'm going to help you. Drake shook his head. There's nothing you can do, Hannah. Walton's sending a confirmation telegram to Judge Tanner. Once he gets a response, he'll arrange to have me transferred to Missouri. Then we need to get you out of here before that happens, Hannah said firmly. Drake stared at her. You're talking about breaking the law. I'm talking about justice, Hannah countered. You're innocent. I won't let them send you back to Missouri to hang for a crime you didn't commit. Drake's expression softened. Why do you care so much? Our arrangement was just for show, remember? Hannah met his gaze steadily. Maybe it started that way, but things change. Something shifted in Drake's eyes, surprise, followed by a warmth that made Hannah's heart race. He stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. Hannah, he said softly, if I get out of here, we'll both be fugitives. Your life in Winnetka would be over. My life in Winnetka ended the day Robert died, Hannah replied. They never accepted me as a woman alone. They'll never accept me at all. The sound of voices from the front office interrupted them. Billy appeared at the cell door, looking nervous. Sheriff's on his way back, he warned. You need to go, Mrs. Sutton. Drake's hand fell away reluctantly. Go, he urged Hannah. We'll figure this out. Hannah nodded, though she had no idea how they would manage it. As Billy let her out of the cell, she glanced back at Drake, trying to convey with her eyes what she hadn't had time to say aloud. She slipped out the back door just as Sheriff Walton's voice boomed through the front of the building. Pressing herself against the wall of the alley, Hannah waited until she heard Walton enter before hurrying back to Martha's house. Martha was waiting anxiously. Well, did you see him? Hannah nodded, collapsing into a chair. Yes, he told me everything. Martha, he's innocent. We have to help him. How? Martha asked practically. Walton's not going to let him go, not with a murder warrant and bounty money at stake. Then we'll have to get him out ourselves, Hannah said, her mind racing. Tonight, before Walton receives confirmation from Missouri. Martha stared at her. You're talking about a jailbreak. That's serious, Hannah. You could end up in a cell yourself. I don't care, Hannah said fiercely. Drake risked everything to help me. I won't abandon him now. Martha was silent for a long moment, then sighed heavily. You really do love him, don't you? This time, Hannah didn't deny it. Yes, she said quietly. I think I do. Martha nodded, as if this admission confirmed a decision. Then we'd better come up with a plan. As darkness fell over Winnetka, Hannah and Martha put their desperate plan into motion. Sarah, Martha's niece, would create a distraction at the saloon across from the sheriff's office, a fight big enough to draw Walton and his deputy away from the jail. Meanwhile, Martha would have her wagon waiting at the edge of town. Hannah would use the spare key to the jail acquired years ago by Martha when she had treated a sick prisoner and never returned to free Drake. If all went well, they would be miles away before Walton realized what had happened. It was risky, fraught with potential for disaster. But as Hannah positioned herself in the shadows near the jail, waiting for the commotion to begin, she felt strangely calm. For the first time since Robert's death, she was taking her fate into her own hands. The sound of shouting erupted from the saloon. Moments later, Walton and Billy emerged from the sheriff's office, hurrying across the street toward the disturbance. Hannah counted to 30, giving them time to become engaged with the fight, then slipped to the back door of the jail. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, the office was empty, lit only by a single lantern. Hannah moved quickly to the cell area, heart pounding. Drake was on his feet the moment he saw her. "Hannah, what are you doing?" She fumbled with the ring of keys she'd taken from Walton's desk. "Getting you out of here." "This is madness," Drake protested, even as he moved to the cell door. "They'll come after us both." "Let them," Hannah said, finding the right key and turning it in the lock. The cell door swung open with a creak. "I've made my choice." Drake stepped out, his eyes never leaving her face. "You're giving up everything. Your home, your land." "It's just land," Hannah replied. "There's other land. There's only one you." The words hung between them for a heartbeat. Then Drake pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that stole her breath. Hannah melted against him, her hands clutching his shirt, every doubt and fear forgotten in the rightness of his embrace. "I've wanted to do that since the storm," Drake murmured against her lips. "We need to go," Hannah reminded him reluctantly. "Martha's waiting with a wagon at the edge of town." Drake released her, though his eyes promised more later. "Lead the way." They slipped out the back door and into the alley. The commotion at the saloon was still in full swing, shouts and crashes indicating that Sarah had done her job well. Hannah and Drake kept to the shadows, moving swiftly toward the edge of town where Martha waited. They had almost reached the rendezvous point when a voice called out behind them. "Hold it right there, Sutton." They turned to find Thomas Pritchard standing in the middle of the street, a rifle aimed at Drake's chest. "Well now," Pritchard drawled, "what have we here? A jailbreak. That's going to look mighty bad for you, Mrs. Sutton." "Step aside, Pritchard," Drake said evenly. "This doesn't concern you." Pritchard's laugh was ugly. "Oh, but it does. Sheriff Walton mentioned there's a bounty on your head. $500 is a tidy sum." Hannah moved to stand beside Drake. "Please, Mr. Pritchard, you don't understand. Drake is innocent." "Don't much care if he is or isn't," Pritchard replied. "Money's money." Drake's hand moved subtly toward his hip, but his gun was still in the sheriff's office, confiscated when he was arrested. "Hannah," he said quietly, "when I move, you run. Get to Martha." "I'm not leaving you," she whispered back. "How touching," Pritchard sneered. "The devoted wife. Tell me, Mrs. Sutton, does your husband know about the coal deposits on your land?" Hannah stared at him. "What? The coal?" Pritchard repeated. "The reason I've been trying to buy you out for 2 years. Did you really think it was about water rights?" Drake glanced at Hannah. "Coal deposits." "I don't know what he's talking about," Hannah said, genuinely confused. Pritchard laughed. "Of course you don't, but your first husband did." "Robert Dawson knew exactly what he had. Why do you think he fought so hard to keep that land? Why do you think I want it so badly?" "Robert never mentioned coal," Hannah said, though doubt crept into her voice. There had been times when Robert had been secretive about parts of their property, discouraging her from exploring certain areas. "He was protecting you," Pritchard said. "Smart man. Knew if word got out, bigger interests than mine would come calling." He raised the rifle. "Now, Sutton, you're coming with me. Sheriff Walton can sort out who gets the bounty." "No," Hannah said, stepping in front of Drake. "If you want him, you'll have to go through me." "Hannah, don't," Drake began, but she cut him off. "I've spent 2 years letting this town push me around," she said, her voice steady. "Not anymore." Pritchard's finger tightened on the trigger. "Step aside, woman." "Is that coal really worth murder, Thomas?" Martha's voice came from behind Pritchard. She stood with her medical bag in hand, expression stern. "Because that's what this would be. Murder in front of witnesses." Pritchard hesitated, glancing around as if just noticing they weren't alone. Several townsfolk had emerged from nearby buildings, drawn by the confrontation. "They're breaking the law," Pritchard protested. "He's an escaped prisoner." "And you're a land-grabbing scoundrel," Martha replied calmly. "We all have our flaws." More people were gathering now, murmuring among themselves. Hannah recognized faces from the general store, the church, neighbors who had shunned her for 2 years. "The man's wanted for murder," Pritchard insisted. "Self-defense," Drake corrected. "Against a man who beat his wife, a man whose brother is a corrupt judge." "Convenient story," Pritchard scoffed. "I believe him," Hannah said clearly, addressing not just Pritchard but the growing crowd. "I believe in him, and I'm going with him whether you step aside or not." A new voice joined the conversation. "I believe him too." Hannah turned to see Sarah, Martha's niece, pushing through the crowd. "The telegraph operator just received a message from Kansas City," she said. "It's for Sheriff Walton, but considering the circumstances." She held up a telegram. "What does it say?" someone in the crowd called. Sarah unfolded the paper. "It confirms that Edward Tanner was known to abuse his wife, and that several witnesses to the shooting have recanted their original statements, claiming they were coerced by Judge Tanner." A murmur went through the crowd. Pritchard's rifle lowered slightly. "That doesn't change the fact that there's still a warrant," he argued, though with less conviction. "Actually," Sarah continued, "the telegram also states that the Kansas City prosecutor is reviewing the case and considering dropping the charges based on new evidence." Hope surged in Hannah's chest. She looked at Drake, whose expression showed equal parts disbelief and cautious optimism. "Is this true?" he asked Sarah. Sarah nodded. "Word for word. It seems someone in Kansas City has been looking into Judge Tanner's activities. His reputation is unraveling." The crowd's murmuring grew louder. Hannah could sense the mood shifting. Pritchard must have felt it too, because his rifle lowered further. "This doesn't change anything about the jailbreak," he said, a last desperate attempt to maintain control of the situation. "No one's broken out of anywhere." Sheriff Walton's voice boomed as he pushed through the crowd, Deputy Billy at his heels. "Because my prisoner is right where I left him, isn't he, Billy?" Billy, looking nervous but determined, nodded. "Yes, sir. I checked not 5 minutes ago. Cells locked tight." Hannah stared at the deputy in confusion, then understanding dawned. Billy had lied for them. But why? Walton approached Pritchard. "Put the rifle down, Thomas. You're drunk and seeing things again." "They're right here," Pritchard protested. "The Suttons trying to flee town." Walton sighed dramatically. "Mr. and Mrs. Sutton are free citizens entitled to come and go as they please, especially considering this telegram I just received." He held up a paper identical to the one Sarah held. "You've seen it already?" Sarah asked, surprised. Walton nodded. "Came in while I was dealing with that ruckus at the saloon. Most interesting reading." He turned to Drake. "Seems you were telling the truth, Sutton. Judge Tanner's under investigation, and the Kansas City prosecutor is likely to drop all charges against you." Drake's arm went around Hannah's waist. "So I'm free to go?" "Technically, the warrant's still active until I receive official notification it's been rescinded," Walton said. "But I don't see any reason to hold you, considering the circumstances." He gave Drake a meaningful look. "As long as you stay in the area, in case there are further questions." Drake nodded, understanding the implied condition. I have no plans to leave. Pritchard, seeing his opportunity slipping away, made one last attempt. What about the coal? Dawson was sitting on a fortune, and his widow doesn't even know it. All eyes turned to Hannah, who looked as shocked as everyone else. Is this true? Walton asked her. I don't know, Hannah admitted. Robert never said anything about coal. But you suspected, Pritchard accused. Why else would you fight so hard to keep that worthless piece of land? It wasn't worthless to me, Hannah replied. It was home. Drake's arm tightened around her. And it still is, he said firmly. If there's coal on the land, that's Hannah's business, no one else's. The crowd seemed to accept this, the tension dissipating as people began to drift away, eager to spread the news about the coal, the jailbreak that wasn't, and the exoneration of Drake Sutton. Pritchard, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, finally lowered his rifle completely. This isn't over, he warned, though his bluster had lost its edge. Yes, Thomas, it is, Martha said firmly. Go home. After a moment's hesitation, Pritchard turned and stalked away, defeat evident in every line of his body. Walton approached Hannah and Drake. I suggest you two head home as well, quietly. And Sutton, I expect you in my office tomorrow morning to make a formal statement about the Missouri situation. Drake nodded. I'll be there. As the crowd dispersed, Hannah turned to Billy. Thank you, she said softly, for lying about the cell. Billy's cheeks reddened. My pa always said there's the law and there's justice. Sometimes they ain't the same thing. With a tip of his hat, Billy followed Walton back toward the sheriff's office, leaving Hannah and Drake standing with Martha in the quiet street. Well, Martha said dryly, that was more excitement than Winnetka's seen in years. Drake chuckled. I seem to bring that wherever I go. You certainly brought it into my life, Hannah said, looking up at him with a mixture of wonder and affection. Martha cleared her throat. I think you two have some talking to do. Why don't you use my wagon to get home? I'll stay with Sarah tonight. Hannah hugged the older woman tightly. Thank you, Martha, for everything. Just be happy, girl, Martha whispered in her ear. You deserve it. As they drove away from Winnetka under a canopy of stars, Hannah felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. She was returning to her homestead, their homestead now, with the man she loved beside her. A man who had risked everything to help her, just as she had for him. Do you think there really is coal on the land? Drake asked as the lights of town faded behind them. Hannah considered this. Maybe. There were parts of the property Robert was oddly protective of, areas he discouraged me from exploring. We'll look into it tomorrow, Drake promised. Together. Hannah smiled at the word. Together, I like the sound of that. Drake's hand found hers in the darkness. When did you know, he asked quietly, know what? That this wasn't just for show anymore, that it was real. Hannah thought about it. I'm not sure there was a single moment, it just happened. Gradually, then all at once. She squeezed his hand. When did you know? Drake's smile was visible in the moonlight. The morning after the storm, when I saw you standing in your cabin in that blue robe looking so beautiful and fierce. I thought, this is a woman worth staying for. Hannah's heart swelled at his words. Is that why you helped me? Because you were attracted to me? I helped you because it was the right thing to do, Drake corrected. Falling in love with you, that was just my good fortune. Love. He had said it first. Hannah leaned against his shoulder, happiness bubbling through her. And mine. As they approached the homestead, the familiar silhouette of the cabin against the night sky filled Hannah with a sense of homecoming she hadn't felt since Robert's death. But this was different, a new beginning, not a return to the past. So, Drake said as he helped her down from the wagon. What happens now, Mrs. Sutton? Hannah stood on tiptoe to brush her lips against his. Now, Mr. Sutton, I think it's time you moved out of the barn. His laugh was low and warm as he swept her into his arms, carrying her up the porch steps just as he had that first night. "I thought you'd never ask." Inside, Drake set Hannah gently on her feet but kept his arms around her. "Are you sure about this? About us?" Hannah nodded, all doubts and hesitations gone. "More sure than I've been about anything in a very long time." When his lips met hers this time, there was no audience to perform for, no pretense to maintain. Just a man and a woman who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen each other despite the risks. And in that kiss was a promise of a future together, of battles fought side by side, of a love born in deception but grown in truth. 5 years later, Hannah sat on the porch of a much larger house, watching as Drake taught their 3-year-old son Robert how to ride his first pony. Nearby, their infant daughter Rachel slept in her cradle, oblivious to her brother's excited squeals. The discovery of coal on their land had indeed been verified. Rather than sell to Pritchard or the larger mining interests that soon came calling, Drake and Hannah had formed their own company, extracting the coal themselves and ensuring fair wages and safe conditions for their workers. The wealth that followed allowed them to expand the homestead, build a proper ranch house, and establish themselves as leading citizens of Winnetka County. Even Edith Palmer had eventually come around, especially after Hannah and Drake donated generously to rebuild the church after a fire. Sheriff Walton had received official notification of the dropped charges against Drake 6 months after that night in town. Judge Tanner had been removed from the bench, his corruption exposed by a dogged Kansas City reporter with a grudge against corrupt officials. "Careful, he's leaning too far right," Hannah called as Robert nearly slid off the pony's back. Drake adjusted the boy's position with patient hands. "He's got good balance, like his mother." Hannah smiled at the compliment. Drake never tired of telling her how much he admired her strength, her resilience, her determination to forge her own path regardless of what others thought. Their marriage certificate, the forged one that had started it all, was framed in Drake's study, a private joke between them. They had been legally married by Reverend Hollister himself, when he actually did pass through Winnetka some months after their adventure, making honest people of them at last. Martha Cooper often joined them for Sunday dinner, having become like a grandmother to the children. She never tired of telling the story of how she had helped orchestrate their escape, though the details grew more dramatic with each retelling. As for Thomas Pritchard, he had eventually sold his ranch and moved east, unable to compete with the Sutton enterprises or to stomach seeing the woman he had tried to run off become one of the most successful ranchers in the territory. "Mama, look," Robert called, sitting tall in the saddle as Drake led the pony around the yard. "I'm riding like Papa." "I see you, darling," Hannah called back. "You're doing wonderfully." Drake looked up at her, his smile as warm as it had been that first night. In his eyes, Hannah saw the same emotion she felt in her own heart: gratitude for the storm that had brought him to her door, for the town that had shunned her, for the desperate plan that had brought them together. "I love you," he mouthed silently over their son's head. "I love you too," Hannah replied, her heart full to bursting. The town that had once shunned her for having no husband had given her the greatest gift of all, the man who had ridden in during a storm and declared, "You have won now." And every day since had proven how right he was.